At the hospital room they said, "Don't waste money on her." The doctor looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I will never forget for as long as I live. He did not say a single word, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. And in that moment, lying on that cold hospital bed with tubes in my arms and machines beeping all around me, I made a promise to myself. A quiet, powerful, unbreakable promise that would change every single thing about my life from that moment forward. You want to know what the most painful thing in this world is? It is not the physical pain. It is not the sickness. It is not even the cold, sterile hospital room. The most painful thing is when the people you loved the most, the people you sacrificed everything for, look at you like you are nothing, like you are a burden, like you are just waiting to die, and the sooner you do, the better for everyone. Hi, my name is Linda. I am 71 years old. I live in a small but beautiful town in Ohio, right near the edge of a quiet neighborhood where the maple trees turn the most stunning shades of orange and gold every fall, and the mornings smell like fresh cut grass and old warm memories. I have lived in the same house for over 35 years. That house is not just a house to me. It is my whole entire life. Every corner of it carries a story. Every wall has a memory painted into it. I raised my son in that house. I cooked thousands of meals in that kitchen. I planted roses in the front yard that still bloom faithfully every spring, even today, as beautiful and unbothered as the day I first put them in the ground. I worked as a school librarian for 32 years. Can you imagine that? 32 years surrounded by books and children and stories, and the kind of quiet magic that only exists inside a library where young minds are discovering the world for the very first time. I loved absolutely every single day of it. I used to tell the kids that books are your very best friends because they never leave you, they never judge you, and they are always there when you need them most. I retired 7 years ago when my knees started giving me serious trouble, and my doctor told me firmly that I needed to slow down. I did not want to retire, but I thought to myself, okay, Linda, you have worked hard your whole life. Now it is time to rest, to enjoy, to finally be with your family and receive some of that love back. That turned out to be the biggest mistake in all of my thinking, because I assumed family meant warmth. I assumed family meant safety. I assumed that after a lifetime of giving everything I had, I would finally be surrounded by love. But life had something very different planned for me. And it all started the day my son brought his wife home. My son, my only child, the boy I raised completely alone after his father passed away when he was just 9 years old. I worked double shifts at the library. I took sewing jobs at night after he went to bed, sitting at my little table in the kitchen with a cup of tea going cold beside me, stitching hems and mending seams just to make sure there was always enough. I went without new clothes for 3 straight years so he could have what other kids had. I packed his lunches with little notes tucked inside. I helped him with homework every night, even when I was so tired my eyes would barely stay open. I was at every school play, every sports day, every graduation, every single moment I could possibly be there for him. I never complained, not once, because he was my whole world. He had his father's eyes, and when he smiled, the whole room felt brighter. I gave him everything I had, everything I was, everything. When he got married, I was so genuinely and completely happy. I remember crying at the wedding, not from sadness, but from pure joy. I thought, my boy found someone to love him, someone to grow old beside. I welcomed his wife into my home with open arms and an open heart. I cooked her favorite dishes even before she told me what they were, because I paid attention. I gave her the good bedroom. I gave her space and time and grace. I treated her like my own daughter from the very first day, and I meant every bit of it sincerely. But she had very different plans. From the very first week there were little things. Small comments that could be brushed aside. Little looks that could be ignored. Moments that made me uncomfortable, but I told myself, Linda, give her time. She is just adjusting. People need space to settle into new situations. So I gave her time. Months passed. A full year went by. And instead of things getting warmer and better between us, they got worse. Steadily and undeniably worse. She started controlling the kitchen first. My kitchen, where I had cooked for 35 years, suddenly had rules I had not agreed to. She reorganized everything while I was out one afternoon, and when I came home, I could not find a single thing. She told me very matter-of-factly that I had been putting things in the wrong places, as if she were the homeowner and I were the guest. She began buying different groceries and telling me my food was old-fashioned. She would cook separate meals for herself and my son, and not include me. I would sit at the dining table I had bought, with my own money, and watch her bring 2 plates out of my kitchen, and sit with my son, and they would eat together while I quietly stood up and made myself a sandwich. In my own home, at my own table. I told my son about it once. Just once, gently and carefully. He looked uncomfortable and said, Mom, you are being too sensitive. She is just trying to make the house feel like her own too. So I stopped talking about it. I did not want to cause problems in their marriage. I loved him too much to put him in the middle. So I kept quiet, and I adjusted, and I bent myself into shapes I did not recognize anymore, all in service of keeping the peace in my own house. Then the comments started in earnest. About my age. About how slowly I walked. About how I sometimes forgot things. She delivered these observations with a particular smile, the kind that looks pleasant on the surface but carries something sharp underneath, like a current beneath still water. She would say things like, "Oh, she forgot again. What do you expect at her age?" Or, "I was reading about this lovely assisted living community in the next town. They have activities and people her own age. She would not be lonely there." She said these things casually, in front of my son, as if discussing what to do with a piece of furniture that had become inconvenient. My son would laugh nervously and change the subject, and I would go to my bedroom and sit on the edge of my bed and look at the photographs on my dresser. My son as a tiny baby wrapped in the yellow blanket my mother knitted. His first birthday with chocolate cake smeared across his whole face. His first day of school, trying so hard to look brave when I knew he was terrified. I used to carry him to school on my back on rainy mornings so his shoes would not get soaked. I used to cut his sandwiches in the shape of stars because he told me once very seriously that star-shaped sandwiches tasted fundamentally better than square ones, and I believed him and kept doing it for years. I used to sit beside his bed when he was sick and hold his hand all night long just to make sure. And now I was sitting alone in the dark in my own home, wondering how to make myself invisible enough to stop being a problem. But I stayed quiet because I loved my son, and I could not bear the thought of losing him. That fear kept me silent for far longer than it should have. I swallowed more than I should have swallowed. I accepted more than any person should ever accept in their own home. And looking back now, I understand that my silence was not wisdom or patience. It was fear dressed up as peacekeeping. And fear, when you feed it long enough, eats you from the inside. The real shift happened when my son got a significant promotion at work. Suddenly there was more money, and suddenly his wife had very strong opinions about how it should be spent and where their life should go. Redecorating, traveling, investing, all fine and none of my business. But then she turned her attention to the house itself. My house. The house that was in my name. The house I had bought, alone and paid off slowly over 20 years of sacrifice and doing without. She started making suggestions. Subtle ones at first, disguised as concern. "Maybe it makes more sense to downsize, Linda. This house is too large for one person. You only use 2 rooms really. Or, If you were somewhere smaller and easier to manage, you would not have to worry about all the upkeep at your age. Or the one that made my stomach drop. There are some really lovely assisted living communities nearby where you would have people around you all the time and staff to help with things. I was not lonely. I was surrounded by people in my own home every day. But apparently my presence was the problem. My son started pulling away quietly but unmistakably. He came home from work and went straight upstairs without stopping to say hello. He stopped having Sunday morning coffee with me, something we had done together every week without fail since he was 17 years old. He stopped asking how I was feeling. He stopped sitting with me in the evenings. It was like I was fading slowly from his life, the way a beloved photograph fades when left too long in the sun. Still there, still recognizable, but dimmer, less present, less significant. And then I got sick. It started with what I told myself was just a stubborn cold. Bone-deep tiredness that sleep did not fix. No appetite. A persistent ache in my chest that I explained away as tension or heartburn or stress. Any innocent explanation I could find to avoid the less innocent ones. I ignored it for almost 2 weeks because I was afraid and because I did not want to be. Bother, and because somewhere along the way I had learned to minimize my own needs until they were almost nothing. That the chest pain became worse, and one morning I stepped out onto the front porch and could barely draw a full breath, and my neighbor, a wonderful woman who has lived next door for more than 20 years and who has always watched out for me, the way truly good neighbors do, saw me from her garden and knew immediately that something was seriously wrong. She called the ambulance herself and held my hand until they arrived. And I have never forgotten that. When I arrived at the hospital, my son came. His wife came with him. They sat together in the waiting room while the doctors ran tests and I lay on the other side of a thin curtain trying to breathe slowly, the way the nurses kept asking me to. I was not supposed to hear their conversation. But hospital waiting rooms are small and voices carry, and I heard every single word. She said, "These hospital visits are so expensive. I really hope this is not going to drag on for a long time." My son was quiet for a moment and then said simply, "I know. Not it will be okay. Not she will be fine. Not do not worry about the cost, she is my mother. Just I know." And then she said the words I have turned over in my mind every day since. She said, "We really should not be wasting money on her. She has had a good long life. We have our own future to think about. We have to be practical." My son did not say a single word to contradict her. The doctor who came to check on me a little while later was a calm, steady man with kind eyes and a manner that made you feel like things could be okay even when they were not yet. When he looked at me, I think he saw something in my face that went beyond the medical situation. I do not know whether he heard anything from the waiting room, but the way he looked at me was not clinical detachment. It was something that looked almost like recognition, like he had seen this exact expression on patients before and understood precisely what had placed it there. They told me I had a heart condition that needed immediate treatment and ongoing care. Serious but manageable, the doctor said carefully and honestly. He told me I was lucky my neighbor had called when she did. Another few hours could have gone very differently. During my 5 days in that hospital, my son visited twice, both times for less than 20 minutes and both times distracted and clearly wanting to leave. His wife came once and spent the entire visit on her phone. No one brought me flowers. No one brought my favorite cardigan from home, even though I said I was cold. No one sat with me through the night or held my hand when the nurses came to take blood at 3 in the morning. I lay in the dark listening to the hospital around me, and I thought and thought and thought. What saved me in those 5 days was my neighbor. She came every single day without being asked. She brought homemade soup on the second day, still warm, and sat with me while I ate. She brought a crossword puzzle book on the third day because she knew I loved them. She stayed for hours and we talked about everything and nothing. She brought my cardigan, my reading glasses, my book from the house. She did all of this because she wanted to, because she genuinely cared. Not because I was a situation she was managing, but because I was her friend and her neighbor and a person she loved. On the fourth day, she sat down beside my bed and took a breath and said, "Linda, I need to tell you something and I need you to listen carefully." And then she told me what she had seen and what she had heard. That 2 weeks before I got sick, she had noticed my son and his wife outside the house talking to a man with a briefcase who she did not recognize. She had not thought much of it at the time. But after I went to the hospital, she had heard my son on the phone through her open window talking about timelines and valuations and the house going on the market. And his wife had used a specific word about when all of this would happen. She said, "Once things are settled." Settled. I lay completely still after my neighbor finished speaking. I looked at the ceiling tiles and I thought about my whole life. About every sacrifice I had ever made. About carrying a 9-year-old boy on my back in the rain. About sewing jobs at midnight. About 3 years of going without a new dress because something else always needed that money more. About star-shaped sandwiches. About 32 years of telling children that books would never abandon them. About everything I had given and built and held together and kept going, through sheer will and love and refusal to quit. And then I stopped crying. I had not even fully realized I was crying until the tears stopped. And in the space they left, something else entered. Something quiet and clear and absolutely still. Not anger exactly, though anger was somewhere in it. Not bitterness, though that was present too. Something more like clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when you finally and fully understand a situation and know without any doubt exactly what you need to do next. I asked my neighbor for a pen and paper. I wrote down my lawyer's name and number, a man I had used years ago for property matters and whose number I still kept in my address book out of some instinct I had never examined. I asked her to call him and leave a message saying I needed to speak with him urgently. She called right there from my hospital room. He came the next afternoon. He sat beside my bed and listened to everything I told him without interrupting once. When I finished, he looked at me over his glasses and said, "Linda, here is what your situation actually looks like, and here is exactly what you can do about it." The house was in my name entirely, and had been since the day I bought it. My son was listed in my will as my primary beneficiary, as I had always intended when I wrote it years ago, under very different circumstances. But a will, my lawyer explained with calm clarity, reflects your current wishes. And your wishes can change whenever your circumstances change. Mine had changed, fundamentally and permanently. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I changed my will. My son was not removed entirely, because I am not a cruel person, and he was still my child, and I still loved him even through everything, painfully and without much logic, the way parents love their children. That the bulk of what I had built over a lifetime would go elsewhere, to the school library where I had worked for 32 years, to establish a permanent reading fund for children whose families could not afford to buy them books. And a meaningful portion would go to my neighbor, who had shown me more genuine love in 5 days than I had felt under my own roof in years. I also worked with my lawyer to set up a living trust that protected the house with absolute clarity during my lifetime and after. No ambiguity, no window for decisions to be made on my behalf by people whose interests were not my own. The house was mine. It would remain mine, and its future would be decided by me alone. When I came home from the hospital, the house looked exactly the same. My son was there. His wife was there, and they were both noticeably more careful around me than before. His wife made me tea within the first hour, and brought it over with a small smile, and I accepted it graciously and said thank you and noticed everything. I noticed the calculation in her new attentiveness. I understood that somewhere during my hospital stay, something had shifted in her understanding of the situation. Whether my lawyer had made some inquiry that reached them, or whether she had simply done her own research and discovered the house was fully and incontestably mine, I did not know. That something had changed. I smiled and drank my tea and said nothing at all. I spent the following weeks focused entirely on my health. I followed every instruction my doctor gave me to the letter. I took my medication at exactly the right times. I started walking every morning, slowly at first, then further as I got stronger. My neighbor walked with me most mornings. We would stop at the small park at the end of the street and sit on the bench and watch the squirrels working through their busy days and talk about everything and nothing the way people talk when they genuinely like each other and have nowhere they need to rush to. I started reading again, properly, the way I used to. Before, the atmosphere in that house had made me feel like simply enjoying myself was an act of taking up too much space. I joined an online book club for women over 60, and it became one of the greatest pleasures of my week almost immediately. I started cooking what I loved to cook in my kitchen whenever I wanted. I started a journal. I started singing to myself again while I made my morning eggs, just quiet snatches of songs the way I had done my whole life before. I stopped because a look from across the room had told me it was unwelcome. I had not even fully realized I had stopped until the morning I started again and understood from the warmth in my chest what had been missing. My son changed. Slowly, genuinely, in the way real changes happen when they are not performed. He started calling more. Real calls with things in them, questions and stories and laughter and comfortable silence. He stopped by my room in the evenings, sometimes just to talk. One Saturday morning he appeared at my door with 2 cups of coffee from the bakery on Main Street and an awkward hopeful expression and said, "I thought maybe we could have our Sunday morning coffee on Saturday this week if that works for you." I said, "Come in, sit down." And we sat in the kitchen and talked for almost 3 hours, and something that had been broken between us began, carefully and slowly, to be repaired. He told me things I had not known about those years, about the internal pressure he had felt, about the stories he told himself to make bad choices feel acceptable, about the moment in the hospital waiting room when something he had been refusing to see became impossible not to see, about sitting in the car in the driveway for 20 minutes after driving home from the hospital that night because he did not know how to look at himself yet. I listened to all of it. I felt the complicated, layered truth of it, the love that had never left and the grief for the years it had been buried and the relief of finally being told the truth. I did not rush to say it was okay because it was not okay. But I said, "I hear you." And I meant that precisely and completely. His wife and I arrived at a respectful coexistence. No dramatic confrontation, no tearful scene. She was polite, and I was polite, and over time some of the performance fell away from both of us, and what remained was something more real, if still somewhat careful. She stopped making comments about my age. She stopped suggesting assisted living. She stopped treating my kitchen like her project. Whether this came from genuine change or from pragmatic acceptance of a new reality, I cannot say, and ultimately decided did not matter. What mattered was that it stopped. And that was enough. I stayed in my house. It is still in my name, and it will remain so. The roses in the front yard bloomed this spring, bigger and more beautiful than ever, deep pink and absolutely unbothered by anything that had happened inside those walls. I stood at the window on a morning in early May and looked at them, and felt something in my chest that was not the heart condition. Something warm and solid and alive. Something that felt a great deal like peace. My health has continued to improve. My doctor says I am doing remarkably well, and that my attitude has a great deal to do with it. I believe him. There is something about deciding to stop making yourself small that the body responds to. Something about standing up in your own kitchen and taking up your full amount of space. The body knows. It responds to that decision, the way a plant responds to being moved back into sunlight after too long in the shade. The reading fund is official now. My name on something that will outlast me. Not on a building or a plaque, but on a small steady stream of resources going every year to the library where I worked, specifically for children whose families cannot afford to buy them books. Every year a child will pull something off a shelf and open it, and find a world inside, and have no idea that the path from that book to that child ran through a cold hospital room and a thin curtain, and a woman lying very still, finally understanding what she needed to do. I find that extraordinarily beautiful. Sometimes in the early mornings I have to put down my tea and just sit with it. I turned 71 last month. My neighbor threw a small party in her backyard, with string lights and her best tablecloth and 3 kinds of cake. Friends from my book club sent cards, and one woman from Tennessee who I have never met in person but I have known forever sent me a beautiful box of chocolates in yellow tissue paper. My son came and sat beside me, and, at one point reached over and took my hand and held it quietly for a while without saying anything. I let him. I felt everything that moment contained, the love and the loss and the possibility all at once. I thought about the hospital room, about lying there cold and listening to voices on the other side of a thin curtain calculating my worth, about the look on the doctor's face when he came in and looked at me. I have thought about that look many times since, and I understand now what was in it. It was not pity. It was something more like a message delivered without words, from someone who had stood in that place many times before and had seen where certain roads lead, and who wanted me to know that there was another road available if I want to take it. I took it. And I'm still walking it. Here is what I want you to take from all of this. Wherever you are watching from, whatever age you are, whatever season of life you find yourself in right now. It does not matter how old you are. It does not matter what people have decided about you or whispered about you in hospital waiting rooms. It does not matter if someone looked at you and saw a burden instead of a person. None of that determines what is actually true about you. None of that has the final word. Your life belongs to you. Your house belongs to you. The roses you planted, and the sacrifices you made, and the love you poured out that nobody counted properly, all of it belongs to you. And it is never too late. Never too late to call your lawyer. Never too late to start singing in your kitchen again. Never too late to sit on a park bench with a good friend and watch the squirrels and feel completely at peace. Never too late to write a different chapter. I am 71 years old and I wake up every morning grateful. Grateful for the maple trees. Grateful for the roses. Grateful for the books on my knitstand. Grateful for my neighbor and her soup and her crossword books and her steady faithful presence. Grateful even for the hardest parts of what I went through because they showed me exactly what I was made of and reminded me of things about myself I had let myself forget. And I am grateful to still be here, to still be fully, completely, unapologetically here. You do not need everyone to see your value. You only need to see it yourself and to refuse, quietly and firmly and without apology, to let anyone convince you otherwise. That is all. That is the whole of it. And it has always been enough. Now tell me where you are watching from. Drop your city in the comments below. Because I genuinely love knowing where all of you are. And if this story touched your heart in any way, if you have a grandmother in your life, or if you are a grandmother yourself, or if you simply believe that older people deserve to be treated with dignity and love and full respect, please give this a like, subscribe so you never miss a story, and share it with someone who might need to hear today that they are not alone and it is not too late. You truly never know whose hands a story will reach at exactly the right moment. Thank you for being here. Let me tell you something more about those years before everything fell apart, because I think those years matter for understanding everything that came after. After my husband died, I threw myself into work and into raising my son with an intensity that, looking back, I can see was partly grief made practical. When you lose someone suddenly and completely, you have a choice about what to do with all the love that was going somewhere and now has nowhere to go. Some people fold inward. Some get angry. I channeled mine into purpose, into my boy and my work and the community I had built around me in that little town. The library became my second home in every real sense. I was there before it opened most mornings and sometimes the last to leave in the evenings. I knew every book in that collection. I knew which shelves the shy kids gravitated toward and which ones the loud, adventurous kids reached for. I knew which families had fallen on hard times and needed a quiet, warm place to spend an afternoon without it costing them anything. I knew which teenagers came in not really for books but because the library was the one place in their lives where nobody was going to shout at them or make them feel stupid or small. I knew all of this because I paid attention. Because paying attention to the people around you and what they actually need is one of the most important things a human being can learn to do, and one of the rarest. I made real friends at that library over those 32 years. The woman who ran the children's section for 15 of those years and who retired just before I did, and who still calls me every Sunday evening without fail to this day. The elderly gentleman who came in every single Tuesday to read the newspaper in the comfortable chair by the window and who told me once that the library was the only place in his week where he felt like a full person rather than a problem to be managed. The teenage girl who came in every single day after school for 3 years, quiet and serious and hungry for every book she could find, who sent me a letter when she got into college to study literature that I still have in my bedside drawer and that I take out and read sometimes when I need to remember why the work mattered so much. And the neighborhood. I cannot talk about my life without talking about the neighborhood because it was the soil that everything else grew in. When I first moved into that house on Maple Street with a small boy and not much else, the neighbors showed up. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just in the steady, ordinary way that good communities look after their own. The woman next door brought dinner that first week without being asked. The couple across the street helped me fix the front step that had rotted through. The elderly woman 2 doors down babysat when I had a late shift and no other options and could not afford to pay anyone. Small things. Enormous things. The fabric of a life built from 10,000 small kindnesses offered and received over decades of living alongside people who actually see you. My neighbor, the one who called the ambulance and brought soup and changed everything, had moved in about 8 years after I did. She arrived with 2 small children and a determination about her that I recognized immediately because I had felt it in myself at the same age. We were friends within a month. Real friends, the kind where you can call at any hour and not be turned away. The kind where silence between you feels comfortable rather than awkward. The kind where you have laughed at enough of the same things over enough years that the laughter has layers to it that only the 2 of you fully understand. When my son was growing up, she was part of our family in the way the best neighbors eventually become family. She remembered his birthdays. She attended his school plays. She scolded him gently when he needed it and celebrated him when he deserved it. He called her auntie even though she was not his aunt. And when he brought his wife home for the first time, my neighbor met her the same day I did, and later that evening she appeared at my fence in her gardening boots and said quietly, "I think that woman is going to need to be watched." She did not elaborate. I did not ask her to, because I had felt the same thing and had been trying very hard not to let myself think it. She was right. as she has been right about most things in the 27 years I have known her. There was a particular moment, about a year before I got sick, that I think of now as one of the moments I should have understood more clearly what I was really dealing with. My birthday fell on a Saturday. I had not said anything about wanting to celebrate because I never wanted to make a fuss, but I privately hoped my son would remember and do something small, anything. A cake from the bakery, a card on the kitchen table, an invitation to have dinner together. He forgot. Or rather, he did not forget, because you cannot forget what you have not been thinking about. He just had other plans, and it was an ordinary Saturday to him. His wife did not forget. She had seen my birthday written on the kitchen calendar. She said nothing. She did not mention it to my son. She let the day pass, without a word, and that evening, the two of them went out to dinner and came home laughing. And I sat alone with a glass of wine and a book and told myself it was fine, and believed almost none of it. The next morning my neighbor appeared at my door with a homemade carrot cake that she had apparently been baking since 6 in the morning, when she suddenly remembered what yesterday had been. She stood on my doorstep in her gardening boots holding the cake and said, "I am 1 day late, and I am sorry for that." I said, "You should not have gone to any trouble at all." She said, "Hush, come and eat cake, and tell me what you are hoping for this year." We sat in her kitchen for 2 hours eating cake and drinking tea and talking easily, and it was one of the best birthday celebrations I had ever had. That is the person she is. That is the person who saved my life both inside the hospital and outside of it. Those years I spent being quiet and small in my own house changed me in ways I am still discovering. I became careful in ways I had not been before, measuring my words, my movements, even my laughter. I stopped singing to myself in the kitchen, just small snatches of songs while I was cooking or washing up, the completely natural expression of a person who is comfortable and at ease in their own space. I stopped because once, early on, his wife had given me a look when I was singing. Just a slight flick of her eyes in my direction and a tightening at the corners of her mouth. Nothing overt enough to address directly, but enough to communicate clearly that my small habitual joy was unwelcome in my own kitchen. I stopped that very day and did not start again for years. After I came home from the hospital and had made my decisions and set things in motion and understood what my life actually looked like and what I intended it to look like going forward, I started singing again. I do not think I made a conscious decision about it. One morning I was making eggs and a song came into my head, and I just let it out, quietly at first, and then a little louder as the kitchen filled with butter and coffee and morning light. And nothing happened. Nobody gave me a look. Nobody's face tightened. I was alone in my kitchen singing to myself, and it was fine, and it was mine, and it was the smallest thing in the world and the most enormous. I notice all the small reclaimed things now. The singing, the choosing what I cook for breakfast without reference to anyone else's preferences, the long Sunday afternoon baths, the staying up late on a Tuesday to finish a chapter because I want to and nobody is waiting for me to be quiet and out of the way, the calling friends on the phone and talking for an hour without feeling like I am using too much of the shared silence. These small things have turned out to be everything. They are the actual substance of a daily life. They are what being alive feels like from the inside when you are doing it right. My son and I are in a genuinely better place now, though better is a complicated word when the thing that made it better required so much pain to arrive at. We have more honest conversations now than we have had since he was 17. We have talked about his father properly and at length, in ways we never managed before, and I think that has been healing for both of us in ways neither of us entirely anticipated. We have our Sunday morning coffee back, not every week and sometimes with his wife present now, but the ritual of it is restored and the warmth in it is real, and I value it more than I can easily say. He told me once, over those Saturday morning coffees that started the whole repair, about the specific moment in the moment, hospital waiting room when everything changed for him. He said he had been sitting there, feeling numb, the way people feel numb when they are choosing not to feel something they know they need to feel. And then his wife said those words about not wasting money, and he looked at her face while she said it, and something cracked open in him that he had been keeping sealed for a long time. He said he understood in that moment that he had been lying to himself in layers, small lies stacked on top of each other over a long time until they had become something he could almost mistake for truth. And he said he knew as soon as the crack opened that he was not going to be able to close it back up again, and that everything would have to change because of that. I listened to all of this. I felt a complicated mixture of things I always feel when my son talks honestly with me now. The love that never went away, the grief for the years it was buried, the relief of finally hearing the truth. I did not say it was okay, because it was not, and I will not pretend otherwise even now. But I said, I hear you, and I meant it, and that was enough of a beginning to build something real from. His wife is different now, in ways that I think go slightly beyond pure self-interest, though self-interest is certainly still present. She remembered my birthday this year with a pot of hyacinths, purple and white, smelling like spring before spring has officially arrived, and she asked how I wanted them planted, and then helped me plant them in the front garden, beside the roses. She asked me once, genuinely and without performance, what it had been like to work at the library for all those years, and I talked about it for a long time, and she listened and asked real questions, and when I finished I thought, there is a person worth knowing in there, if she keeps choosing to let that person show up. I keep my eyes open. My will is in order. My house is in my name. But I also believe that people are capable of real change when the circumstances of their lives require a different version of themselves. What is happening now is better than what was happening then, and I am willing to meet that honestly while remaining clear about what I need and what I will not compromise on ever again. The book club women have become some of the most important people in my week, and I want you to know that building those connections did not require anything dramatic or expensive or complicated. It required showing up every Thursday evening on a video call with 11 women spread across 9 states. Women I have never met in person, most of them, but who I know in all the ways that genuinely matter. We talk about books, but we talk about life through books, and that is where the real value lies. These are conversations about what things mean, and what we think is true, and what we have changed our minds about, and what we are still trying to figure out. 11 women who did not know each other 2 years ago, and who now know each other in the ways that count. My granddaughter was born 8 months ago. My son and his wife's first child. A small, perfect, furious human being, with her grandfather's eyes and opinions about the world that she expresses with great passion despite having no words yet. When I hold her, I feel something that I do not have adequate language for. Something to do with continuity and love that extends forward in time, and the understanding that the things you put into the world keep going after you. In the people you raised, and the funds you established, and the stories you tell in the communities you helped build. I'm going to be a good grandmother. I'm going to be the kind who shows up with soup and who teaches her to tend roses and to choose books and to know the difference between the people who truly see her and the people who only see what she can do for them. I'm going to tell her own grandmother's story when she is old enough to hear it, and I am going to say to her clearly, you do not have to make yourself small for anyone, ever, for any reason. And the most important thing you will ever do is know your own worth and protect it. That is the whole story, or all of it that I know how to tell so far. The rest is still being written, morning by morning, walk by walk, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, chapter by chapter. The roses will bloom again in a few weeks, and I will be here to see them, standing at my kitchen window with my morning tea and my song, fully and completely and unapologetically here. And I want to say one final thing. The most quietly radical thing an older woman can do in a world that has decided she is past her useful date is to be obviously, thoroughly, fully alive. Not merely surviving but thriving. Not quietly fading but singing in the kitchen, and calling her lawyer when her lawyer needs to be called, and planting roses and joining book clubs and making sure everyone around her knows she is still here, still entirely herself, and fully intending to stay that way for as long as she has breath in her body. I am doing that. On purpose. Every single day. And I recommend it with my whole heart. Now you, tell me your city. Drop it right down in the comments below, because I read every single one and I love knowing where all of you are. If this story moved you in any way, please give it a like. Subscribe so you do not miss another story. And share it today with someone who needs to hear that they are not alone, that it is not too late, that their house is still their house and their kitchen is still their kitchen, and their roses will absolutely bloom again in May. You never know whose life a story will reach at exactly the moment they needed it most. Thank you for your time and your attention and your willingness to sit with an old woman from Ohio and listen to her tell her story at full length and without apology. I love you all. Take care of yourselves out there. You know what I have been thinking about a lot lately? About what it actually means to be brave. People think bravery is dramatic. They think it looks like running into a burning building or standing up in front of a crowd or doing something that makes headlines. And maybe sometimes it does look like that. But the bravery I know, the bravery I have lived, looks much quieter than that and is no less real for being quiet. Bravery looked like picking up the phone in a hospital room and calling a lawyer when every part of me was tired and sick and heartbroken. Bravery looked like sitting in that bed and letting myself hear the truth about my situation without turning away from it. Bravery looked like coming home from the hospital and walking through my own front door with my head up, knowing what I knew and choosing not to let it make me small. Bravery looked like the first morning I stood at my kitchen stove and let a song come out of my mouth again. Bravery looked like sitting across from my son in our kitchen on a Saturday morning and telling him the truth about what those years had felt like, even knowing it would hurt him to hear it, because the truth was the only foundation we could actually build anything real on. None of those moments looked brave from the outside. They probably looked like an old woman going about her ordinary day. But from the inside, each one required me to choose myself, to insist quietly and firmly on my own dignity and my own worth. And after years of choosing, otherwise that felt like the most difficult and most important thing I had ever done. I want to say something about money too, because money is part of this story. And I think it is important to be honest about that, even though we are sometimes taught that talking about money is unpleasant or vulgar. The house was mine because I had worked for it and paid for it over 20 years of disciplined and sometimes painful saving. That house represented decades of labor and sacrifice and deferred comfort. The sewing jobs at midnight. The 3 years without a new dress. The double shifts at the library. Every single dollar that went into that mortgage was a dollar I had earned and chosen to put there instead of somewhere else. All those small daily choices adding up over 20 years to something that mattered. Something permanent. Something that was mine in the fullest and most unambiguous sense of the word. When someone looked at that house and saw an opportunity to be seized, rather than a life that deserved to be respected, they were not just being unkind to me personally. They were dismissing everything those 20 years of choices represented. They were saying that the labor of a woman who worked double shifts and sewed hems at midnight and raised a child, alone, and showed up every single day for 32 years to help children find books that would change their lives, that all of that labor was somehow not quite real, or not quite worth protecting. And that is a thing I was not and am not willing to accept. My lawyer understood immediately. When I sat in that hospital bed and told him what was happening, he did not look surprised, and he did not look sorry for me in a way that was condescending. He looked at me like a person who had a situation and needed information and tools, and he gave me both clearly and efficiently and without drama. That is what a good professional does. And finding good professionals, people who treat you as a competent adult capable of making your own decisions when given the right information, that is one of the most practically important things you can do for yourself at any age, but especially as you get older and the stakes of the decisions you face get higher. I also want to say something about what it means to have a neighbor like mine. Not everyone has that. I know that, and I do not take it for granted. The community I had in that neighborhood was something I had built slowly over 35 years of showing up and being present and being the person who remembers and the person who shows up with soup and the person who knows which kids have trouble reading and stays a little late to help them. Community is not something that arrives in your life. It is something you build every day through the ordinary acts of paying attention and showing up and being genuinely interested in the people around you. And then when you need it, when you are on a porch not being able to breathe and someone needs to call an ambulance, it is there. Not because the world is automatically fair and kind, but because you spent years building something that could be there when it mattered most. Build your community before you need it. Be the neighbor who notices. Be the friend who calls on Sunday evenings. Be the person who shows up with soup and crossword puzzle books without being asked. It comes back, not always from the people you gave it to, and not always in the form you expected, but it comes back. The world is not as cold as frightening things make it look sometimes. There are people in it who will hold your hand until the ambulance arrives. Find them, keep them, be one of them for someone else. And to anyone who is watching this and who recognizes their own situation somewhere in my story, who is living quietly in a space that does not fully honor who they are and what they have built and what they deserve, I want to say this as clearly and as directly as I can. You are allowed to change things. You are allowed to call lawyers and update documents and make decisions that protect yourself even when those decisions are inconvenient for people who were counting on your compliance. You are allowed to walk through your own house like you own it, because you do own it, in the deepest sense, whether or not your name is on the deed, because you built it, you filled it, you gave it its meaning and its warmth and its history. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be fully and inconveniently and joyfully alive. Nobody gets to take that from you without your consent, and you are allowed to withdraw your consent at any time. It is never too late. Not at 71. Not at 81. Not at any age that still has mornings in it and roses that are going to bloom in May and books waiting on the knitstand and a neighbor somewhere nearby who is keeping an eye out for you from her garden. As long as you have those things, you have everything you need to begin again. I'm going to go water my roses now and make my tea and maybe call my neighbor and tell her I talked for a very long time today to a whole lot of people all over the world and see what she says. She will say something dry and funny and exactly right, as she always does, and I will laugh, and it will be a good evening, and tomorrow I will wake up and do it all again. Grateful, present, singing in my kitchen, fully, completely, unapologetically here. Thank you for listening. Every single one of you. Take care.